And we're back with you here on In Focus. Let's have a look at what's leading right now in the news. President Cyril Ramaphosa admits to government's failure to provide basic services. Speaking in Parliament, responding to the debate on the presidency budget vote. The NPA's investigative directorate ropes in Interpol to arrest the infamous Gupta brothers so they can stand trial in South Africa. And KSAC launches an application in the Johannesburg High Court challenging the constitutionality of the recent Judicial Services Commission interviews. Now, South Africa battles the COVID-19 third wave, and primary school pupils are set to return to full-time learning. There are calls for teachers to be prioritized for vaccinations. Joining me now to talk about this is Executive Director at the National Professional Teachers Organization of South Africa, Basil Manuel, and Legal Resource Center Attorney Cecile van Schalkwyk. And good evening to you both, and thank you very much for your time.
Good evening.
Basil, let's talk first to yourself and how the teachers are feeling going back full time, just as we are announcing a third wave that is quite imminent at this time.
Of course, as expected, there's a certain level of anxiety, and the anxiety is informed by many things. However, we've also heard from the same teachers their concerns about the losses of learning, particularly with our junior primary, and how many of them are unable to master reading even at grade 2 because they just haven't had enough time. And certainly as NAPTOSA, we've embraced the idea that we've got to balance out the concerns on the one hand, the health and safety, and try and ensure that we can manage that, and against the needs of the learners. We can't have a lost generation of learners. And we are going to manage that. Part of the managing, of course, is our call for teachers to be vaccinated. And we've had a lot of positive feedback about that. And we're even having a meeting tomorrow with the DG just about that. And we hope that an announcement is imminent.
Now, Cecile, many have likened the vaccination or inoculation program in South Africa to, especially when it comes to teachers, to a lottery. You know, like by a stroke of luck, maybe teachers are going to get vaccinated if their combination of the numbers is correct. Of course, there are a number of reasons for that. It's because the vaccines that we are using are in short supply, but also the number of those who need to be vaccinated is quite high. What is the view from your side on what government needs to do here?
I think that, right at the early stages when we started vaccinating people, it was always said that teachers would be prioritized. Of course, we had our healthcare workers that had to be prioritized, and that there's no doubt that needed to happen. But, in February of this year, the health department was already saying in the second phase of the rollout, our teachers will be prioritized. And for some reason, that just fell by the wayside. And we saw that people over the age of 60 started being vaccinated. And of course, teachers who were over the age of 60, as you well say, could fall within that lottery, get the vaccine. But that doesn't speak to the much larger group of teachers who stand in front of classes every day, and I think there's no doubt that any classroom, especially an overcrowded classroom, is almost like a super spreader event unto itself. So it exposes the teacher, it exposes the children, and it's important that government prioritizes these group of educators because they are frontline workers. And it's important, as Basil mentioned, that education continues as normally as it possibly can. We have lost so many months of education for children. We cannot afford to lose more of it. And in order to stop that from happening, it really is important that government looks at this group of educators and start prioritizing them in the vaccine rollout process.
Yeah. How should then this access be prioritized? Based on where they are or based on the number that they're exposed to?
I mean, I think that, that's a decision that government needs to take. What we would ideally want is that all the educators who are teaching in some form or another gets vaccinated as soon as possible. We have in South Africa about 440,000 educators. The healthcare workers obviously surpassed that number, and they could get vaccinated within a couple of months. So the reality is that, if we go at the pace that we're going at currently, we can vaccinate this group of people, and sort of make sure that they're safe and able to teach in the conditions that they are going to be forced to teach in.
Now, Basil, let's talk then about whether or not we have now settled in South Africa that the hybrid model is just not working for us. I mean, I've spoken to some teachers who have said this thing of 1 week in, next week out, it's just not working for them. The kids come back and they've learned nothing, actually.
That's absolutely true. But just before I pitch into that, let me say that NAPTOSA is also talking about education workers, everybody at the school. Because remember, it's not only teachers there, we have cleaning staff, we have ground staff and the like. But the hybrid model has been a dismal failure, especially in the junior classes, because they don't have anybody at home during those off days who's going to pick up the reading, who's going to pick up the writing, who's going to pick up the mathematics. But even the older youngsters, teachers are telling us that they're teaching to empty lounges and empty dining rooms. They think the children are watching, they think the children are participating, and these darlings are playing outside, they're doing their own thing. But of course their icon is showing that they're present. So it hasn't been even for the well-heeled schools who've managed it. But more importantly, the vast majority of schools haven't had the resources. Our department hasn't been able to spread this out, even in the models that we suggested, utilizing of halls and churches and temples and the like. It hasn't happened. So we haven't been able to maximize learning in the off days. The reality is, on the days when the children have been off, they have simply just not been doing anything. Not much, at any rate. Some teachers have tried desperately creating worksheets, creating additional things. But if you look at it and you analyze it a little more closely, the reality is, if a child has been there all the time when school has been on, you're there for 50% of the time. If you've missed an extra day, the time just decreases by leaps and bounds. And we have an estimate that about 30% of learning has happened as opposed to the 100%. Now, we know it's defensible because we've had COVID. And however, we've got to do better. And that is why NAPTOSA, and mind you, the other teacher unions, have supported the return of the primary schools. It's just a little more difficult with the secondary schools, given how many secondary school children have been infected. And we've got to wrap our heads around that. But it hasn't worked. That's the bottom line.
Now, how do we then move forward? Because it seems there is this preoccupation of wanting to go back to the old way of doing things instead of making new decisions or coming with new innovation. In fact, one of the unions says the basic education department is obsessed with that thing of just wanting to go back to how things were before COVID-19. I mean, we wouldn't be having a question of worrying so much about vaccinating a whole lot of teachers if we were able to come up with better solutions of how do we proceed in a new way going forward.
I think we've got to be fair. There are solutions and there are possibilities there. But the limitations lie with cost. The limitations lie with bandwidth. The limitations lie with where our children live and whether they even have access to electricity. So there are real stumbling blocks. And it won't happen by tomorrow. But I agree with the critics that say we've got to be investigating the other things. NAPTOSA ourselves have said that. We've said we can't be stuck in this mode only. We've got to explore all the other modes. We know that this virus and maybe another one will be with us for a long time to come. So we've got to look at other solutions. But let's not pretend that this can happen in this year or in this month. It can't. That is a fool's paradise. We've got to accept that these things take a little longer, but we can't stop planning and stop looking for solutions.
Right. Cecile, at what point do we reach a collective agreement that maybe it's not a good time for us to continue having person-to-person learning, right? Because we have been seeing in all sectors, private schools and public schools, reported cases of infections continuing to rise.
I mean, I think, Tabo, that the reality is that at this point, we have to continue with face-to-face classes. We simply do not have the resources at this point in this country to do it in any other way. And I think the one thing that needs to be brought into this conversation is the fact that a lot of the sort of the private schools that you mentioned and a lot of the better resource schools have, of course, been going on online. And on the days that the children have been working from home, some of them have been taught to full capacity. And while a large number of children who are in poorer resource schools, in our no-fee schools, and in areas where sometimes the schools don't even have electricity, let alone access to data or the internet or even the ability to be able to be learning from home, those children have been falling behind severely. And the gap between the children who are in better resource schools and children who are in poorer resource schools have increased dramatically. And unfortunately, we do not at the moment have the resources to get everybody up at the same level. So the collective agreement about what we should do is that children should be taught face to face at the moment. In order to obviously mitigate the impact of that, we need to roll out the vaccines, not only to our educators, but hopefully eventually to the children as well.
Yeah. Basil, are teachers ready to push back at opening without vaccination? I mean, we will find ourselves at a position where teachers are saying, well, no vaccination, no opening.
Well, I'm not. We are not on that page. Let's say we have always said, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the other unions, but the collective of unions that has been around the table with us, that has been consulted in the matter, that wasn't a prerequisite. We've said that would be a positive if we do that, because it will help still a lot of concerns. And the one is about the mental health of our teachers. Fear is real. It doesn't matter what informs it. And our people are fearful, and with justification, because a lot of our teachers also have comorbidities. And of course, even though our experts, and both educational and science experts, are telling us that your primary school children are not easily infected or infectious, the reality is that the very teachers can come in with the virus. Their colleagues can come in with it. And those are the fears. And remember, your average teacher actually impacts on 100 to 150 households per day. And that is the fear of parents on the other hand. So when we look at this in the grand scheme of things, when we talk about vaccinations, it's not about teachers only. It's about settling the minds of our educator population, but certainly also our parent population. And they have to feel comfortable that their children are safe. And that is why we haven't said it's a prerequisite, but we've said it's an important step, as is the PPE, as is the water, and so many of the other things which we still have on the table. We haven't forgotten about them, and we put them on the table when we had the consultation meetings.
Basil Mandrell, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us, Executive Director at NATOSA, as well as Legal Resource Center, Attorney Cecile van Schalkwyk. When we continue next, NUM rejects the report clearing under Derator at Eskom, saying that Parliament needs to conduct an inquiry into these allegations. We'll get the details in a moment when we continue next here on In Focus. Stay with us.